Okay, so for Tuesday, we're going to be continuing with the readings in Reading the World. We're going to be reading an excerpt from Thomas Hobbes' book, Leviathan. And we're going to be trying to apply the same questions to it we've been applying to all of these, right? So again, remember that your goal is to try to pull a theory of education out of it, right? Now, I'm going to warn you guys, I know that like the stuff we've been reading so far has been sometimes a little bit conceptually difficult, but the language has not been especially hard. You're going to want to go slow with Hobbes because he tends to write long, complex 18th century sentences, and some of the vocabulary is a little bit difficult, right? So it's only 5 pages, right? It's a short excerpt, but just, go slowly. Remember that you may have to read it more than once to get it, right? And just, I just want to show also, see, what I do in my books, right? I make notes for myself. This is a good practice to get into, right? If this is not something you already do, you should be making notes in your books. If your books are rented, you can get around this by putting in sticky notes, or just writing in pencil and erasing it before you return it, right? That's a bigger pain in the ass than sticky notes, but it's the same basic idea, right? Part of the idea here being that if you're physically interacting with the text more, you will better retain information, and it will help you come up with ideas. Not only that, but you'll have a record of what you were thinking when you were reading this the first time, right? And then, if you read it again, you have a record of what you were thinking the second time, right? So you get more of a record of your thought process than you get if you're just highlighting things. Okay, other thing that I want to remind everybody about, right? So I've given everybody a chance to make up homework that they've either missed or they want to try to get a better grade on. So the Chapter 3 assignment is due tonight, if you want to try to do better on that. The Chapter 4 assignment is due tomorrow. And then the window on all this closes, right? Because we have to move on. And I can't wait forever to get material from people. So does anybody have any questions about that? No? We're good? All right. Then let's talk about Sun Tzu. How'd this go for you? What did you think? Don't all jump up at once. Any thoughts, any comments?
The same thing as the last one.
Okay, in what way, Deep? How is it similar to the last one?
He has a lot of I can't think of word. Metaphors.
Okay, yeah. There are a lot of metaphors in here, right? But does Sun Tzu argue using metaphors in quite the way Mencius does?
Yes, in parts.
He uses similar metaphors, right? But for Mencius, you have to unpack the metaphor to get the whole argument, right? Does Mencius ever really clearly state what he's arguing? It's all packaged in metaphor, right? What's the first sentence of Sun Tzu's essay? Very first thing he says.
Man's nature is evil.
Yep. Man's nature is evil. Goodness is the result of conscious activity, right? So what we have here is a kind of clear statement of thesis, right at the very beginning, right? It's like, this is the point that I am going to try to argue. And so instead of sort of unfolding an argument gradually through metaphor and dialogue like Mencius did, or through short aphorisms like the Buddha did, Sun Tzu is trying to set up an argument that proceeds logically. Right? He's, this is the point I'm trying to make, and then he's going to rehearse this point with examples in each paragraph that follows, right? So he's going to be using metaphors to make his points, but he is also not forcing us to do quite as much work to understand what the point is, right? Or to understand what the argument he's making is. How else is this similar to Mencius's piece? Can we think of any other ways this is like what Mencius wrote? He's making the opposite argument Mencius did, right? What was Mencius's point? What was Mencius trying to prove?
Man's nature is good.
Yeah. Mencius was arguing, yes, man's nature is good. Right, or we would say human nature is good. But these are old public domain translations, so they tend to use man to refer to all human beings. So human nature is good, and so for Mencius, what is the basic purpose of education? If human nature is already good. We don't need education to become good, right? But what was the point of that last parable that Mencius gives us about Ox Mountain, right? Where Ox Mountain was once lush and green and a thriving ecosystem, right? Then a city is built next to it, and people start clearing the mountain for lumber, hunting the animals for food, things like that, right? And then they're left with a great big bare hunk of rock. And people see the mountain now and they think that hunk of rock is all it is, right? How did Ox Mountain get that way? Yes, it got that way because environmental factors, or outside factors, forced it to be that way, right? But that doesn't mean that it's its nature, right? Its nature, its original state, is to be a lush, green, thriving ecosystem, right? So the point Mencius is trying to make with this parable, with this metaphor, is that we need education. We need to practice being good in order to remain so in the face of a hostile world, right? Because forces in the world outside of us are going to try to make us bad. So we need education to cultivate and preserve our good nature. Sun Tzu is arguing the opposite point, but he's doing so using the same basic set of social and philosophical assumptions, right? So what do we remember about the philosophical system that Mencius is arguing from? What's it called? What is the philosophical or religious system that Mencius is a part of?
Confucianism.
Yes, good, Gilly. Thank you. Confucianism. And what do we remember from last time about Confucianism? What are the primary values of Confucianism?
Unstable period.
Pardon?
Unstable period.
Okay, yeah, that's not something they value, right? But it's something that they were, the system was created in a period of instability, right? So yeah, it's created during a period of war instability. And it's about preserving stability in an unstable world, right? So we can actually sort of put that as a kind of value, right? So preservation of society in an unstable world. What else do we remember about Confucianism last time?
Life is a ritual.
Yeah, this notion of life being life or society being like a ritual, right? That everybody has to play their particular part or the ritual fails, right? So think of a common ritual in which you might participate, like a wedding, right? So what happens if the best man forgets the ring? No wedding. What happens if the preacher shows up drunk? No wedding. What happens if the groom gets sick and throws up on the bride? Probably no wedding, right? So the point is, in order for a ritual to go off, right, in order for a ritual to, have the social effect it's supposed to have, everybody has to perform their part, right? Each part has to work in harmony with the others. So what Confucianism envisions, remember, is a society moving in harmony. Right, which means that everybody plays their appointed role. This involves, right, on the one hand, deference to your superiors, including your parents. So this is a concept, when you see a concept called filial piety referenced in Confucian essays, right? This in particular refers to the respect that children are expected to show to their parents or to their elderly relatives, right? Even if your parents are bad people, you are supposed to show this deference to them, right? Whether they are good or not is irrelevant. You are also supposed to show benevolence and generosity to your inferiors, right? Not beyond what they deserve, but you are supposed to, just because someone is socially inferior to you does not mean you get to treat them like dirt or push them around, right? They should show deference to you, and in return, you should be showing kindness and generosity to them, right? So the whole idea is that one works to become what Confucians call a junzi, or gentleman. I know we didn't go over this last time. I'm building on what we did last time here. And to become a gentleman, you practice li, or ritual, in order to cultivate ren, or humanity. And the basic point of this, right, the idea of ritual here, ritual really means something like appropriate social behavior. Right, so we behave in the appropriate prescribed ways in social situations in order to forge better and stronger connections with other people, right? So the whole thing is about society and community, not so much about the good of the individual, right? The whole thing is about tying a community together. Okay, so any questions? So just as a reminder here again, right, so Mencius is a follower of Confucius, right? So he subscribes to this particular philosophy. Sun Tzu is also a Confucian. But they're arguing over a point that Confucius himself didn't address, right? whether human beings are naturally good or naturally evil, or neither. So, Sun Tzu is writing slightly later than Mencius. And is making the argument, as we stated, that man's nature is evil, that goodness is the result of conscious activity. So basically what this means is that we have to force ourselves to be good, right? According to Sun Tzu's logic. Mencius believed that without any other kind of interference, human beings would naturally do what was good, right? We would tend to prefer the good over the evil. Sun Tzu is arguing the opposite, that actually, if left to our own devices, we are nasty, selfish, vile creatures who care only about ourselves and will screw our friends and family to get ahead, unless we consciously work against our own nature. So does the argument he's actually making sound more like Mencius or more like the first piece we read by the Buddha?
First piece.
Yeah, the Buddha was making a similar argument, right? That human beings, by our very nature, want things and strive for things. And if we want to reach enlightenment, we have to stop doing that. So we have to put an end to desire and work against our own natures. Sun Tzu is coming from the same, he's arguing the same point, but from a different philosophical perspective, right? The Buddha's argument is about individual enlightenment. Sun Tzu and Mencius are both concerned, again, primarily with social harmony, right? So it's important to remember what's going on in the background of this. It's important to remember the kinds of basic assumptions that are being made. So let's look at Sun Tzu's specific arguments. Can I get a volunteer to read the first paragraph for us on page 71, starting with man's nature is evil? All you gotta do is read words, guys. Okay, thank you, Kaylee.
Man's nature is evil. Goodness is the result of conscious activity. The nature of man is such that he is born with a fondness of profit. If he indulges this fondness, it will lead him into wrangling and strife, and all sense of courtesy and humility will disappear. He is born with feelings of envy and hate, and if he indulges these, they will lead him into violence and crime, and all sense of loyalty and good faith will disappear. Man is born with desires of the eyes and ears, with a fondness for beautiful sights and sounds. If he indulges these, they will lead him into license and wantonness, and all ritual principles and great forms will be lost. Hence, any man who follows his nature and indulges his emotions will inevitably become involved in wrangling and strife. Will violate the forms and rules of society and will end as a criminal. Therefore, man must first be transformed by the instructions of a teacher and guided by ritual principles. Only then will he be able to observe the dictates of courtesy and humility, obey the forms and rules of society, and achieve order. It is obvious from this, then, that man's nature is evil and man's goodness is the result of conscious activity.
Okay, it's a pretty bleak view of human beings, right? So let's start with the primary binary that Sun Tzu sets up. What's the primary basic binary around which his argument is organized? What are the two opposite poles that are striving here? Yeah, good and evil. And I think we want to try to look at how he specifically defines both of these in this paragraph, right? to note exactly what he means, in particular here by evil, right? So what sorts of behaviors does he define as evil? Or what sorts of ideas or feelings?
Like wanting?
Okay.
Selfishness.
Yeah, wanting, right? Desire for profit is one thing that he mentions. Right? Envy and hate. What other sorts of things does he, what other sorts of ideas does he attach to his notion of evil?
Violating the rules of society.
Okay, yeah, violating the forms and rules, right? Yeah, violation of social norms is evil. What else is evil here? What does he mean when he talks about desires of the eyes and ears and beautiful sights and sounds? What kinds of things do you think he's talking about when he says that? Man is born with the desires of the eyes and ears, the fondness for beautiful sights and sounds.
You don't want the nicer things in life?
Well, like what kinds of things?
Leisure, luxury, and I don't know.
Okay, but I think you're thinking around the right lines here. What are luxuries usually? What part of our being are luxuries usually designed to please?
I don't know.
Think about it in terms again of the eyes and the ears. Your senses, right? We want luxurious things because they feel nice, or because they smell nice, they look nice, right? So sensory pleasures also fall here into Sun Tzu's definition of evil. Now, what about good? Do we get a sense of what he means by good in this paragraph? Whoever's phone it is, please silence it. What's good, according to Sun Tzu?
The rules of society and just general order.
Okay, yeah, social order. What else? What else specifically does he describe as good?
Ritual principles.
Okay, ritual principles, which are themselves about developing and preserving social order. What other qualities does he regard as good? The nature of man is such that he is born with a fondness for profit. If he indulges this fondness, it will lead him into wrangling and strife, and all sense of courtesy and humility will disappear. Where in that sentence do we see what he regards as good?
At the end. Like courtesy and humility.
Yeah, courtesy and humility, right? He is born with feelings of envy and hate, and if he indulges these, they will lead him into violence and crime, and all sense of loyalty and good faith will disappear. This sentence is set up the same way, right? The thing that's supposed to be good is at the end, right? The thing that's supposed to be good is the thing that he's worried will disappear if people follow their own natures, right? So loyalty and good faith. So if we had to define good and evil here in terms of a particular theme, right? what do the good things have in common with each other, and what do the evil things have in common with each other?
The evil is really selfish, and then the good's more being good for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah. The evil behaviors are all selfish or individualistic, right? While the good behaviors are all community-oriented. Right? They're concerned with how you deal with others or how you treat others, right? Courtesy, like being polite to other people, humility, being deferential to your superiors, loyalty, right? Keeping your word, sticking with people when the times get tough, good faith, being honest, dealing with people without breaking your promises, breaking your word, right? So what's good is about sort of building up trust within a group of people, right? Good is the group, evil is the individual who is just out for himself or herself, right? All right. So then we start getting metaphorical, right? A warped piece of wood must wait until it has been laid against the straightening board, steamed, and forced into shape before it can become straight. A piece of blunt metal must wait until it has been wetted on a grindstone before it becomes sharp. Similarly, since man's nature is evil, it must wait for the instruction of a teacher before it can become upright, and for the guidance of ritual principle before it can become orderly. If men have no teachers to instruct them, they will be inclined towards evil and not upright. And if they have no ritual principles to guide them, they will be perverse and violent and lack order. So, some of these metaphors he's using are actually quite similar to ones Mencius used, right? Especially when he talks about the warped piece of wood. Where did Mencius talk about wood and shaping wood, and what was he doing with that metaphor? If we look back on page 66, all right, we have the first little passage here about shaping willow wood into cups and bowls, right? Master Cow said, "The nature of things is like willow wood, and duty is like cups and bowls. Shaping human nature into humanity and duty is like shaping willow wood into cups and bowls." Do you follow the nature of willow wood to shape cups and bowls, replied Mencius, or do you maul it? If you maul willow wood to make cups and bowls, then I guess you maul human nature to make humanity and duty. It's talk like yours that will lead people to ravage humanity and duty throughout all beneath heaven. So Mencius is using the warped wood metaphor for to make a very different kind of point than Sun Tzu is, right? For Mencius, remember, this wood is human potential. And what does he think happens to that potential if you try to force it into a particular shape? What does Mencius think happens to that wood, or that human potential, if you try to force it into a particular shape? Yeah, like you're doing violence to it, right? You're mauling it. You're taking something that was good in and of itself, and you're forcing it to be something else. Sun Tzu is making the opposite argument, right? He's still using wood and metal as metaphors for human nature. But note that while Mencius just uses willow wood and the warping is the process that occurs when you try to shape it, Sun Tzu adds a modifier to each of these words, right? The wood is already warped. The metal is already blunt. So what does this suggest he thinks about human nature left alone?
Like
If-
it's ruined to begin with.
Yeah, that it's useless. You can't do anything with it, right? In its natural state. The warped wood has to be steamed against a straightening board in order to make it useful. The blunt metal has to be sharpened on a grindstone in order to make it useful, in order to make it good, right? So if human nature is the wood and the metal, then what are the straightening board and the grindstone? What are they meant to represent here?
The ritual.
Rituals and principles, yeah. And what's the other essential component for Sun Tzu of education? What else do you need in order to teach yourself to be good? Can you do it on your own?
Teacher.
Yeah. The straightening board and the grindstone are the teacher. Right? Sun Tzu argues that in order to become properly educated, you need a teacher. Mencius seems to think that education is something you can more or less accomplish on your own, maybe with a little help, right? But you don't necessarily need a mentor or a teacher because your nature is good anyway. Right? For Sun Tzu, it's impossible without a teacher. If you don't have someone who's already walked the way to show you what to do, then you're just going to fall into these errors. Because you're just going to be following human nature. And in order to resist human nature, you need help. Right? You need a mentor. In ancient times, the sage kings realized that man's nature is evil, and that therefore he inclines toward evil and violence and is not upright or orderly. Accordingly, they created ritual principles and laid down certain regulations in order to reform man's emotional nature and make it upright, in order to train and transform it and guide it in the proper channels. In this way, they caused all men to become orderly and to conform to the way. Hence, today, any man who takes to heart the instructions of a teacher, applies himself to his studies, and abides by ritual principles may become a gentleman. But anyone who gives free rein to his emotional nature, is content to indulge his passions, and disregards ritual principles becomes a petty man. It is obvious from this, therefore, that man's nature is evil and that his goodness is the result of conscious activity. So the second half of this paragraph, right? What strategy is Sun Tzu using to make his argument? Why is he saying, what's his evidence that things are as he says they are? Think of the first half of the paragraph as the argument, right? And the second half is the evidence.
Because these rituals already exist.
Mm-hmm. They already exist. And who created these rituals? He doesn't go into specifics, right? But who generally created these rituals? Pardon? Who realized that man's nature was evil in ancient times?
Man.
More specifically, in ancient times, the sage kings realize that man's nature is evil, and that therefore he inclines towards evil and violence, and is not upright or orderly.
So the sage king.
Yeah, these sage kings, right? And remember, what's one of these key Confucian values? Right? Deference to superiors and to historical authority, right? So what he is doing here is referencing a historical authority to defend his point of view, right? He's referencing tradition as his evidence, right? If I am wrong, then the sage kings would not have needed to institute these rituals, right? If human beings had not needed to be reformed, if human beings were not naturally bad and selfish and vicious. Right, and we get another binary here as well by the end of the paragraph between the gentleman and the petty man. And what are the features he ascribes to the petty man? What is the petty man like? What does the petty man do that the gentleman doesn't? If we look towards the end of the paragraph.
I said indulges passions.
Yes, the petty man indulges his passions, and what else?
Gives his emotions free range.
Yes, gives free rein to his emotions. Right, now these are qualities that in some cultural traditions would be regarded as good, right? So one thing we have to recognize again is that we are dealing with a culturally specific definition of good and evil, right? That's why it's important that we work these things out. Now what about the gentleman? How is the gentleman different from the petty man? What does the gentleman do that the petty man doesn't?
Applies himself to his studies.
Okay, yeah, he studies. Right? The gentleman does his fucking homework. What else does he do?
Listens to his teacher.
Yes. He listens to his teacher. And he abides by ritual principles, right? So if we had to sum up the difference between the gentleman and the petty man in a phrase, or in single words, how might we do so? What do we notice the petty man's characteristics have in common? What do the gentleman's characteristics have in common? Yeah, well, the petty man indulges in behaviors that seem to correlate to Sun Tzu's definition of evil, right? So yeah, that's true. But what else? By studying, listening to his teacher, and following the prescribed ritual principles, what is the gentleman doing?
He's like abiding by the social rules.
Yeah, essentially what he's doing is abiding by social rules, kind of submitting to authority, right? And by indulging his own passions and behaving emotionally, what's the petty man doing that's basically the opposite?
Disrespectful.
Yeah, the petty man's behavior is disrespectful, right? Right, he disrespects authority by treating his own feelings and desires as though they're what's most important, right? So we can see here that these definitions of good and evil, in addition to being about community values versus selfish values, also have to do with particular attitudes towards authority, right? And would it be fair to say that Sun Tzu seems to be, generally speaking, pro-authority? All right, then let's continue here, right? So this is where he directly addresses his rival, Mencius, right? Can I get somebody to read the paragraph at the bottom of page 72, starting with Mencius states that man is capable of learning? Yeah, that's somebody who hasn't. Let's hear other. Let's. Oh wait, or Kaylee read the last one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, right. You did not. So yeah, go ahead.
Mencius states that man is capable of learning because his nature is good, but I say that this is wrong. It indicates that he has not really understood man's nature, nor distinguished properly between the basic nature and conscious activity. The nature is that which is given by heaven. You cannot learn it, you cannot acquire it by effort. Ritual principles, on the other hand, are created by sages. You can learn to apply them, you can work to bring them to completion. That part of man which cannot be learned or acquired by effort is called the nature. That part of him which can be acquired by learning and brought to completion by the effort is called conscious activity. This is the difference between nature and conscious activity.
Okay, so what's Sun Tzu trying to establish in this paragraph?
That Mencius is wrong.
Okay, that Mencius is wrong, right? That's right. Mencius doesn't understand this, so screw that guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what does he think Mencius is confused about in particular? What is the basic thing that Mencius doesn't understand?
Nature and conscious activity.
Yeah, that Mencius doesn't understand the difference between nature and conscious activity, right? So this is built around another binary, right? Notice like most of these paragraphs seem to be built around some pair of opposites, right? And so what are these definitions then of nature and conscious activity that Mencius doesn't grasp? What is nature? How does Sun Tzu define nature here?
What's given by heaven?
Yeah, what's given by heaven, right? Is the phrase he uses. So essentially, like what you start out with at birth, before you've done anything in the world and before the world has done anything to you, right? What you have without having had to acquire it. Make sense? Now what about conscious activity? How does he define conscious activity?
It's acquired by learning and brought to completion by effort.
Yeah, conscious activity, this is what you get through learning and effort. And he accuses Mencius of having these two concepts mixed up, right? That if you're already good without conscious activity, then that learning and effort aren't required, right? And remember, too, that Confucianism places a great deal of value on learning, effort, and study, right? You have to understand what your place is in society's great ritual, and in order to do that, you study. So yeah, there is a long scholarly tradition attached to Confucianism. So can I get somebody to read the paragraph that follows on the top of page 73? Someone who is not Kaylee or Carrie because they've already read. Starting with, it is a part of man's nature that his eyes can see. Yeah, go ahead, Martha.
It is a part of man's nature that his eyes can see and his ears can hear, but the faculty of clear sight can never exist separately from the eyes, nor can the faculty of keen hearing exist separately from the ears. It is obvious then that you cannot acquire clear sight and keen hearing by study. Mencius states that man's nature is good and that all evil arises because he loses his original nature. Such a view, I believe, is
Erroneous.
It is the way with man's nature that as soon as he is born, he begins to depart from his original naivety and simplicity, and therefore he must inevitably lose what Mencius regards as his original nature. It is obvious for this that the nature of man is evil.
Okay, so what's he talking about here? So, like with the eye and the ear and the senses. What's going on here? What are our eyes and our ears and our sensory perceptions connected to?
Nature.
Our nature, right? By our nature, right, because we are given eyes and ears, we can hear and we can see. These do not require conscious activity and are thus not in and of themselves good, right? You can't acquire them by study. Mencius states that man's nature is good and that all evil arises because he loses his original nature. What Hsun is arguing is like, no, we don't lose our original nature. We maintain all the parts of our original nature unless we work to correct them. Right. If we can see and hear, then there's no way we can avoid being influenced by the world around us, right? So if sensory pleasures are evil because selfish, but we're given senses with which to enjoy them, then denying our senses is working against our nature, right? But if that's what we have to do in order to be good, then our nature is evil and conscious activity is good. Does everybody follow the logic here? Everybody still with me? Is this making sense? Okay. So let's move a little bit further on here. There's a passage on page 75 where he talks about tools. Abdul, can you read the paragraph that starts with, if the nature of man were good, we could dispense with sage kings and forget about ritual principles?
If the nature of man were good, we could dispense with sages kings and forget about ritual principles.
Mm-hmm.
But if it is evil, then we must go along with the sages kings and honor ritual, don't lie in.
I think you missed a.
Ritual principle.
Yeah.
The strengthening word is made
Mhm.
because of the right rule. The plumb line is employed because things are crooked. Rules are set up and ritual principles are elucidated
Mm-hmm.
because the nature of man is able. From this, it is obvious then man's nature is able, and that his goodness is the result of conscious activity. A straight piece of wood does not have to wait for the strengthening wood to become straight. It is straight by nature, but a right piece of wood must wait until it has been laid against the straightening board, stream and forced into shape before it can be straight. Because by nature it is wrapped. Similarly, since man's nature is able, he must wait for the ordering power of the sage kings and transforming power of ritual principles. Only then can he achieve order and conform to goodness. From this is obvious, then, that man's nature is able and that his goodness is the result of conscious activity.
Okay, so this paragraph, you see, is built around an extended metaphor, right? What are the things that are being compared to each other in the paragraph? The straightening board is made because of the worked wood. The plumb line is employed because things are crooked. Does everybody know what a plumb line is? Okay, it's a tool that carpenters and engineers use to make sure something is level, right? So you drop the plumb line to see if like the structure that you're building is level or crooked, right? So the straightening board is made because of the worked wood. The plumb line is employed because things are crooked. Rulers are set up and ritual principles elucidated because the nature of man is evil. So what are the things here that are being compared?
I think it's the straightening board and the plumb line.
Okay, the straightening board and the plumb line are part of the comparison, right? And what do the straightening board and the plumb line have in common? What sorts of things are they?
They're both tools.
Yeah, good, they're tools. And what are they being compared to?
The sage king.
Yeah, the sage kings and the ritual principles, right? So the sage kings and ritual principles are like tools how?
They're fixing like what's wrong with human nature.
Yeah, they exist to correct something, right? They exist to correct a problem. Just as a straightening board exists to straighten worked wood, and a plumb line exists to make a crooked structure level, the sage kings and the ritual principles exist to help evil humans become good, right? That is their function. That is how they are like tools. Someone may ask whether ritual principles and concerted conscious activity are not themselves a part of man's nature. So for that reason, the sage is capable of producing them. But I would answer that this is not so. A potter may mold clay and produce an earthen pot, but surely molding pots out of clay is not part of the potter's human nature. A carpenter may carve wood and produce a utensil, but surely carving utensils out of wood is not part of a carpenter's human nature. The sage stands in the same relation to ritual principles as the potter to the things he molds and produces. How then could ritual principles and concerted conscious activity be a part of man's basic nature? So what's the argument he's making here about the potter and the carpenter? what's their relationship to their respective crafts? Is it something they were born knowing how to do?
Something I learned.
Yeah, it's a learned skill, right? It's a learned behavior, right? You're not born knowing how to shape pots on a wheel, right? Someone has to teach you how to do it. And you perfect the art through practice, right? So he develops the tool metaphor in the preceding paragraph, where tools and sage, kings, and ritual principles exist to correct something, right? To argue that goodness is the result of learning and practice, like a craft, right? It's like a skill. Right. It's something you learn to do, not something you're born with. All right, so just one or two more quick things, and then I'll let everybody go. So on page 77, towards the bottom of the page, Sun Tzu writes, "You have said, someone may object, that the sage has arrived where he has through the accumulation of good acts. Why is it then that everyone is not able to accumulate good acts in the same way? I will reply, everyone is capable of doing so, but not everyone can be made to do so. The petty man is capable of becoming a gentleman, yet he is not willing to do so. The gentleman is capable of becoming a petty man, but he is not willing to do so. The petty man and the gentleman are perfectly capable of changing places. The fact that they do not actually do so is what I mean when I say that they are capable of doing so but cannot be made to do so. Hence, it is correct to say that the man in the street is capable of becoming a you, but it is not necessarily correct to say that he will in fact find it possible to do so. But although he does not find it possible to do so, it does not prove that he is incapable of doing so." So, what's the basic argument here? Does Sun Tzu think you should be able to force people to practice goodness and conscious activity?
No.
Yeah, if you're just forcing someone to be good, are they actually being good? No, they're only doing it because you're coercing them, right? You're forcing them to do it. In order to be good, you have to make a conscious choice to be good, right? You have to want to be good. So it's on the student as well as the teacher, right? The student has to want what the teacher is selling. The student has to want what the teacher is offering. The teacher can't make the student absorb the lesson. So we talked a little bit last time about kind of the age-old nature and nurture debate in psychology, right? Does anybody remember what this is, what this means?
Nature is like you're born a certain way. Nurture is like you were raised to be a certain way.
Yeah, exactly. It's about where your personality comes from, basically, right? It's an argument about the level of impact that either your genetic makeup or environmental influences have on the development of your personality, right? So the nature argument is that genetics and inborn qualities are stronger, right? The nurture argument is that environment is the key factor. So Mencius came down pretty clearly on the nature side of this, right? That our inborn nature is what's more important. Where does Sun Tzu fall in the nature versus nurture thing?
Nurture.
Yeah, or at the very least, yeah, the environment is more important if we actually want to be good, right? If we don't care about being good, if we're perfectly satisfied being a petty man, right? No one can make us be good. And we can just sort of, be as we are. But if we actually want to contribute to society, if we want to participate into society, then yeah, nurture is the more important part of the equation here. So let's go back to our original 4 questions here. Like, can we discern a theory of education from all of this? What does Sun Tzu seem to take education to mean?
Learning and following your ritual practices.
Okay, yeah, learning and following ritual practices with the guidance of a teacher, right? That's certainly what he seems to think the process is, right? That's how you become educated. But what does it mean to be educated for him? To be good, yeah. And we've already sort of pulled out of here that good means largely to submit to the authority of the social order, right? To do things that are pro-community and pro-social rather than to do things that are selfish. So knowledge seems to be related to this notion of conscious activity, right? That which you gain through learning and effort. And the purpose, we can say, is to reach the status, right, of the gentleman who submits to legitimate authority and to the will of the community and tradition, rather than trying to selfishly forge his own path, right? So does this make sense to everybody? Everybody with me? Anybody have any questions? We all followed along? Okay. So I'll let you go with that. Remember that for next time, you're reading the excerpt from Thomas Hobbes. I'm just going to remind everybody again, please, go slowly and take notes, right? It's going to be a hard read. It's really short, but it's going to be a difficult read.